Welcome to the 5th episode of the Chartered Show. The theme of the show is retirement villages. I'm joined by 3 guests. The first guest, Jason Appel, retirement specialist from Chartered Wealth Solutions, and he's going to be looking at it from a financial planning perspective and how different scenarios have different impacts on your financial planning. I'm joined also by Lynda Smith, client of Chartered Wealth Solutions, and she's going to be sharing with us from her perspective what it's been like living in a retirement village. And we're also joined by Rob Jones. He's not a client yet, but he's a specialist on life rights, and he's going to be sharing with us some of the interesting insights that he's got from his years of experience. So sit back and enjoy the show. Today I'm joined by retirement specialist Jason Appel, and we're going to be discussing what I could call quite a controversial topic. It's a topic around retirement villages, and we're going to be looking at how retirement villages impact the buying of them, impact your financial planning. Jason, welcome to the Chartered Show.
Thanks for having me on, Kim.
So Jason, I was in a meeting with you, or many meetings with you, where this topic comes up often. Should I, shouldn't I move to a retirement village? Now, given your age, I'm not expecting you to be able to tell me whether you want to move to a retirement village or not. But your parents are at that age, and I know you did a whole study around whether it was going to be cost effective for them to move into a retirement village or not. Maybe share with the listeners a little bit about the exercise you did.
Yes, at the time my dad was looking quite seriously at moving out of their home. They've lived in the same place for over 30 years now. So it was a big mental thing for them to go through, but I really helped on the financial side. So we looked at 2 options, a life rights estate, and I looked at a outright purchase estate where you actually own the property. And I ran the numbers to see which one worked out more economically favorable. Also depending on your individual wealth, what would work for you as well as an individual. And we learned some very insightful things, the costs associated with it, the life right contracts, the fact that you might have to pay a little bit more for an outright purchase compared to a life right. The life rights actually proved quite favorable, and I was taken by surprise because as South Africans we led to believe in bricks and mortar, and we don't really like life rights, and we think, well, I won't own the property if I buy it. And that's a bit of a fallacy, because internationally buying into estates for retired clients internationally, especially in the States, is mainly life rights. There's no real such thing as an outright purchase. So the bricks and mortar is not as important, and from the numbers perspective, it actually worked out quite cost effective for my dad.
I think I must just point out, Jason's parents are still not living in a retirement estate.
No.
And I think a lot of it is also very emotional. So we can do the numbers, we can prove that it's cost effective or it's not cost effective. It comes down to, and I think we must stress it just at the beginning of this conversation, it comes down to your preference, it comes down to maybe your financial standing, and it also comes down to emotionally, how you feel about it. So we are not saying at all, Jason and I, we're just putting a disclosure out there, that we do or we don't believe you should be moving into a retirement estate.
Yeah.
But it is a common conversation, and I think it's also one that is so good to have, because then you're making an informed decision about what your next move's going to be.
100% agree, and in every review this year so far, the conversation is coming up. And it is exactly that. It's just a conversation. It's never, you have to do this for these financial reasons. Often it's talking about the practicalities around it and sharing other client stories that leads just to an exploratory exercise. And I've had a few clients who've walked away from the meeting, not committed at all to doing it, and then have started their own journey, and they've come back to me a few months later to say, hey, I've put an offer in on this place.
So Jason, what I found is it plants a seed, because for many times there are many clients that are absolutely not in a chance will I ever be in a retirement village. And then I get others that potentially have had older parents that they've had to look after, and they'll say to me, I never want to be a burden to my children, so when I can, I'm going to move in. So that's one topic. And then it also comes down to this whole concept of age. And I mean, I think there's so much for you and I to unpack here. Maybe let's start with the age one. Because what is the right time to move into a retirement village? Again, it's going to be a personal one, but
it's a personal one, but financially from a numbers game, if you're buying into life rights, if you think about it, you're buying a life contract.
Okay.
It's better to do it younger, because if you buy in at 72, they base it based on your life expectancy. You still pay the same price. So if you're 55 and someone else is 72, buying the same life right contract, you pay the same price. So if you do it sooner rather than later, you actually get more value for your money. You pay the same price as an older person, and that older person may only end up with 10, 15, 20 years max. Whereas if you're 55, you could have a 40-year, 45, 50-year term.
But what we all know is not only do we encourage return on investment, and that would be a return on investment, we also encourage return on life. And a lot of people are not even vaguely ready to speak about it at the age of 55. So I just think it's good to just point that out. And then also what I do find is often only when you're in retirement do you work out where you want to live. So just because you might live in the Gauteng area doesn't mean you're going to retire here. And it takes time to discover where you want to go. So just consider that, even though I hear what you're saying, cost effectively, the earlier the better.
Well, there's a few things that you can do if you're not ready to make that commitment. What I encourage my clients to do is at least go and start shopping around, looking at what's available. And a lot of these places have a waiting list, and that's the thing you need to be aware of. So you're not just going to walk in and one's going to be available. If you're lucky, maybe that happens. But there's a small amount you pay just to be placed on a waiting list, and they'll call you when one's available. And let's say at that stage you're not ready. You politely decline, and then you go from being the top of the list to be number 2. And then lo and behold, in a year's time, another one comes available. So you can defer this decision for as long as possible. Just keep in mind that some retirement estates have an actual maximum age as well, where they won't allow you to.
Maximum age?
Well, if you want to buy into a freestanding home or cottage, you need to have kind of, in their viewpoint, good health. So if you try and buy into them too late, they often won't allow you to buy the freestanding options. And that's why you got to shop around. And you have to understand each life rights place has a different contract, different set of rules, and you're buying into their rules. So it's always good to have alternative options. And then some of them, unfortunately, do have this upper age limit where they say, okay, because you're buying in at this age, you're now restricted to an apartment or a smaller unit or something like that. But once again, I have a client very financially astute who bought purposefully into an apartment because he knew it had no garden. He wanted no garden maintenance. It's so personal. Whereas others want a little garden space. So all that stuff needs to be kept, taken into consideration when you make this decision.
And I think just on the age, yes, there's the cap, but I also think from an emotional point of view, what I've seen with a lot of clients is when you go into much older, it's harder for you to do the change, it's harder for you to pack up your house, and it's also harder for you to make the friends.
Well, I've just had a client now who's made the transition. Unfortunately, his wife was ill, so he's had to make this call and change his lifestyle. And I thought, he may struggle, and I think he also thought he was going to struggle, but he was so surprised at when he went into these estates. Your neighbor is not necessarily this old guy that can't have a conversation. It's someone just like you that had the same apprehensions, and then you can strike up a conversation. You can play a game of golf with them. You can go on the bowls green, whatever you want. And a lot of them are actually still working as well. So I think it's not to go in there with a preconceived notion that you're going to end up in this old age home. I think they're not that anymore.
I think it's definitely what we've all probably seen with grandparents and people that we've known going into those places that are so petrifying, so we stay away as long as possible. But Jason, just on that point, I mean, maybe let's talk when you're doing the financial planning and the scenario planning, because this is where I see it really works, when we do the scenario planning and you start taking all the costs into account. Because we come into retirement, we've got X amount that we've got to get us through retirement. And now we've got all these costs and we've got all these expenses. What do you find is the difference between living in our homes and maybe going to a retirement village when it comes to cost? I mean, firstly, when we buy them, are they cheaper?
Well, there's definitely an upside to a downscale, and that's come very apparent from a lot of my clients who've actually physically made these transitions. When you move into a life route or even a normal retirement estate, a lot of the maintenance costs are taken care of for you, so you'll pay a potentially higher levy to stay there. But in that levy, sometimes your security is definitely included, maintenance costs are included, and some of them even include a meal. For example, there's a meal levy that you can get lunch or dinner once a day during the week. So there's lots of added benefits to doing that. And when we start offsetting those costs from your own budget, for example, life rights, you don't pay rates and taxes anymore. So if you had a very expensive property with high rates and taxes, those go away in a life rights estate. You don't have to employ a gardener anymore. You don't have to have a maintenance guy. You may still have a domestic helper once a week to come in and clean, but generally the place is a lot smaller. There isn't a pool, a tennis court.
So your monthly expenses are definitely low.
Definitely low. They definitely do come down. Even sometimes where the levy seems quite high and you think, oh my gosh, when I look at the budgets a year later, the clients have definitely saved because they're spending 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 Rand less, even including the levy, just because all these things you have to factor in yourself, and these surprise costs, if your geyser bursts in these places, there's a maintenance guy that comes there and repairs it. It's not something that you now have to fork out of your own pockets or have your own insurance for. So there is immediate savings, and it takes some time to adjust to that.
But compounded, it's huge. But maybe just one last point on the costing of it. I've often been in meetings also where people have thought their big homes are going to be able to realize capital from selling their home. But a lot of these retirement estates are also really expensive.
Yes, that's right. So depending once again on what option you go for, an outright purchase, and I mean it can be as much as R1 million. The same size unit, same style and everything, outright costs you, let's say 3.2 million Rand, and the life right costs you 2.2 million Rand. Okay, and the one you own the bricks and mortar, and yes, there might be some capital appreciation, but down the line, that's not necessarily guaranteed the property. And James did a whole interesting interview with you on this exact topic. The life right secures your lifestyle in that environment for a slightly lower cost than it would to buy outright. And that security means that once you're into the life right, they can never really kick you out. Even if you were to run out of money, that minimum amount that
they can't.
No, they can't.
I didn't know
that. Look, they will do a financial means test before you're allowed to purchase, but they're not necessarily that strict. They're not looking for people with millions of rands before they move in. They're just wanting to make sure that you can cover that basic levy. But if you get to a point where you can't, let's say you live to 103 and you've now exhausted your money, that life right value, let's say you paid 2 million Rand for it, that they start eating into that basic amount which they give back to your beneficiaries. And there's no sale. They don't have to worry about, transfer duty and all that stuff, because it's a contract. It just comes to an end, and then contractually they'll pay back your children or your surviving spouse, whoever, that money that you've put in, maybe a little bit less, because often there's a bit of a reduction, and that's how they utilize that portion to refurb the unit for the next buyer. But my client just moved now into a beautiful life right and new floors, new everything.
So they come in and they redo it
before you buy.
So Jason, I think one last question that I want to ask you, given the fact that you are a son of parents who might be going into retirement estate, if you can convince them, how does it feel for you if they did choose a life right and then you might not be getting the full inheritance that you could be getting? I mean, what would your message be to your parents or to parents going through that kind of quandary of looking after themselves and then maybe not having as much to leave to their children?
I completely support it. A lot of these retirement estates also have frail care, mid-care, high care facilities, which is an important consideration. And knowing that my parents potentially have invested money that I might not get out at the end of the day, but they've secured their lifestyle, a certain quality of living, quality of life, and all the amenities and services which I might have needed to fork out one day. You don't know where things go. So I'm for the school of thought that my parents and my clients rather secure their lifestyle, and as a son and a beneficiary of an estate one day, I'd rather know that my parents were adequately cared for, and that there's no financial risk of having to put extra money in down the line. It really helps knowing that that's kind of secured and taken care of.
And it's also really nice to then see your parents living this life and actually setting an example to you of them living their best chapter instead of actually scrimping and saving and not going out and experiencing life for the hope that you will enjoy your life, because we actually learn way more from example than we do from what our parents say. So thank you, Jason, for joining us on the show today. This topic, I think we could be talking about for hours and hours. And please share with us some of your questions, because I can always have Jason back on the show and we can unpack it some more. So if you have any questions around retirement estates, please come and send those to us. And then just also to say, with your retirement specialist, have one of these scenario planning meetings where you look at it just as a consideration. We're not saying you have to do it, but have a look what a difference it does make. And thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Kim.
Welcome to our guest, Lynda Smith.
Hi, Kim. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Now, Lynda is a couple of things, though. So, not just one thing. She is a client of Chartered Wealth Solutions. She is also the founder of 50 Plus Skills. But today, what I've asked her to join us to speak about is not 50 Plus Skills. We'll do that at another time. Today, she's going to be sharing with us about her journey of coming into a retirement village. So, Lynda, I know we've talked about this a few times, and it's one of these topics. I've got a couple of clients like this that are never going to be seen dead in a retirement village, and then I find out they're in a retirement village. And I think you're a little bit like that. I hadn't expected it, and yet I got the phone call from you. So maybe just guide us through your journey of coming here.
Sure, Kim. So for me, being in this industry as a retirement life coach, it's one of the questions that I often work with each person that I'm dealing with. But each person is unique. So in my case, I had my house on the market and had decided that I possibly would rent in a retirement village to just try and understand if it was the right process for me at this point in my life.
So that's sensible in what you're saying, because what you're doing is you put away your capital, so you're not using your capital, and then you're trying it out. Okay.
Yes, and for me, part of the reason was having my mom as a sort of looking in the rearview mirror as to how she did things. And she went in her late 60s on her own because she had been a widow for a long time. So in the context of my situation, I am on my own. Both my children are married and living internationally. And so for me, part of the reason in this two-step process was to make sure that when I purchase for the long haul. First, as a lock up and go in this next season where I'm still working and traveling and active, and then slowly but surely kind of changing that as I grow older or when health happens, more so for anything that my children don't panic or have to worry about me at a distance.
Oh, that's a big one. This, with so many people's children going overseas and not being in South Africa, it is a big advantage. So what I basically thought today, we could look at some of the advantages and maybe some of the disadvantages of coming into a retirement village. And Lynda, the reason we have these kind of discussions, and maybe I should just say that to the people watching, it's not to say that this would be the right way for them. We're sharing your journey, and I think it's because it's a kind of one of those debatable topics. We kind of have it, should we, shouldn't we move in? And I think for most of us, we always feel like we're way too young. I mean, I've sat with clients in their 80s that tell me when they get older, they'll move to a retirement village. And then I've sat with people in their 60s and their 50s who've said they're considering it. So yeah, so we're not at all, this is not, it's your opinion.
And this is my journey.
It's your journey, and it's really a discussion. So we'll start off with that, because I don't want anybody to say, look, these are the advantages and disadvantages and they're different for me. It's we're starting a conversation here. So let's look at some of the advantages. You've mentioned your children being overseas. That's a huge one.
So I think for me, one of the great ones for most people is security. So having the opportunity of not ever being stressed about where I live and knowing that the security is there. One of the others is when you on your own as you grow older, quite frankly, I don't want to cook all day, every day. And so one of the things that I've really enjoyed here is the fabulous meals. I don't have to buy it, I don't have to cook it, I don't have to wash up. I come, I eat, I go home, and I'm happy. So that's been a great
lover of cooking meals, Lynda. Now I'm learning something.
You know what? No, I loved it in the other seasons of my life.
Okay.
And it was quite funny. I always used to think my mom was lazy. Please forgive me, Mom, for that. She wasn't. I'm quite similar now. I love it when I've got someone to cook for. But to cook just for yourself every day is not fun.
And then, Lynda, what about, like you've said, alone and the eating, but what about the activities and the involvement? I mean, is there lots on? Are people friendly? Or I suppose it's dependent on which place you live in.
Well, I think that's the other question. I'll get to the activities now. I think the landscape of retirement living is very different now than it used to be for our parents. So the over 50 villages, all the way through to the care centres, staying in your own home and bringing the care to you. So the world of this retirement living and finding your picture is very much a completely different journey, and you need to learn about the different pieces to understand which pieces you need and when. And so for me at this point, it's absolutely lock up and go. I'm working most days and most activities are during the day. So at this point, I have no interest in getting involved in any of the activities. It's nice to know my neighbors. They're really friendly, but I am more of independent living by myself in an area that I'm absolutely loving living in.
So Lynda, that actually, I'm going off topic a little bit, but it brings me to something that watching people in retirement that I've got to think a lot about. There's definitely different parts of retirement, because as you've just said now, here you are looking for lock up and go and not to get involved in the activities.
Correct.
Yet there is a time in your life where you're not wanting to travel the world and you're not wanting to go places, and actually the activities are what is so important about a retirement village.
You know, the majority of people who live out the longest time in a retirement village are women. As their husbands die, by a large percentage, and we are living much longer. So I see many of the women here who are on their own or have lost husbands. The community around them is there to support them and to be able to assist them in whatever it is that they're doing. And so that's another important part of a village like this, is you're not alone. Even for me, moving during the middle of COVID, from Hartbeespoort Dam all the way down to Somerset West was quite a big step to take. But one of the fabulous things about being here was, if I need a doctor, because you need all those new things in a new town, you know, from the hairdresser to the doctor to the physio, and I was able to ask here and be directed to the best without too little effort.
Because you had all the community.
Because the community is here to serve and to work with the residents. So from that point of view, and you know, where I am is a very modern, new retirement village. So again, the context in people's minds, it's a very broad landscape.
So just so that you know, I'm here with Lynda in Somerset West today. We're also doing some traveling to bring you these shows. But that's another one, because you've moved into a retirement village, you've actually moved towns as well. So it was great that you brought it up, because how do you get to know the community and all of that when you make that move? But Lynda, while you were talking, something that I hear again often is around what age. So you know, I think my biggest question I always get from clients is, how will I know I've got enough money? How much is enough? You know that question. But then that other one is, so what is the age? I mean, when would we go to a retirement village? And some people are saying, well, I'll go there in my 80s. Others are saying, let me go in my 50s. I mean, maybe just share a little bit around that.
So so I think, again, in the world of longevity, if we're looking at 100 as the number, we've got 30 years ahead of us, and you may have 3 different seasons, but you can live those seasons in one place. So that's again a decision. But for some people it might be different. It might be staying in the big home, then moving down and then changing again. But for someone financially, for me, it made sense to have one move more rather than 2 or 3 moves over the next season of my life.
Because Lynda, again, it's all costs that are involved in it. So, I mean, we're talking from the financial perspective as well, and there's the emotional side of the move, but there's also that financial side of transfer fees or all the costs involved of moving and packing up, and they do mount up. And so, I mean, it does make sense to come to one place if you
and my mom was in a Johannesburg retirement village, and when I lived out at the dam, I would often, in my early 50s, spend a night or 2 with her every week for 3 years. So I actually got a key to her front door at 50 in the retirement village. So I've been doing this in and out already. And you're
going to be the most experienced person that ever makes a decision of whether they buy or not.
and she used to say to me, I've watched people come in their late 70s and not settle, because the older we get, the harder change is. And I believe that you need to make this move before a crisis. But many I see make it as a result of the crisis. And that then makes it an unhappier experience than if you're doing it consciously and intentionally as part of the journey of life.
Of your plan. Yeah. I mean, I see it also with, often if you've lost your partner.
Yes.
Then you go. I've also seen it where it's really worked quite differently when you get forced by your children to go in. So Lynda, I mean, we've talked a lot about the considerations, the advantages, but for you, are there any disadvantages that you can see, that you want to share about?
So I think the one thing that for me is interesting is, well, it's not a disadvantage, but it is something I have a lot of conversations with people about, is wherever you go, you take yourself with you. And wherever I'm happy within myself, so wherever I'm going to be, I will make sure I get out there and do something. So I think being happy internally gives you a greater chance of success no matter where you go with your decision. But from a negative point of view, I think that being in a 1 generation or a 2 generational environment rather than a multi-generational environment.
Because you've always encouraged, and I know I've read a lot of your stuff and I've followed you for a long time, that it's important to be mixing with people younger than yourself.
Yeah. So no matter if I live here, I live outside of the village as much as I live inside the village. And that, I think, is a critical part of the journey, is to get involved in the area where you're going to live. And you might move in the same area you've always been. And that also is important for some people. I've done the move across the country, which many people are doing because they're emigrating to the Cape.
That we know.
But for me, at the time when I made the decision, I have a lot of long-term friends who live down here from my school days, my bridesmaid, some of my friends in the work that I do. So I didn't come alone. I came with quite a wide range of people that are not in my backyard, but that are very close. And the thing that I've loved more than anything living here is I've had so many visitors. It's been
we all want to get a trip to the Cape.
Yeah. So, the negatives and the positives depend completely on the person's attitude to a large extent and how they intend to integrate and what they're doing. Working for me is sitting at my desk, and I'm able to do it as easily here as I can anywhere in the country, or even visiting my children. So I take my work with me and I integrate into the community as part of that process, and then I can be happy anywhere.
Thank you very much, Lynda. Your insights are always so valuable, and yeah, just leaving you on this thought, it's a conversation. Have the conversation, do your homework as much as you can, and I'm sure you together with your partner, if you've got a partner, will make the right decision. Thank you, Lynda.
Pleasure. Thanks, Kim.
Welcome to our next guest, Rob Jones, who's joining me from Shire Consulting. Rob consults to retirement villages and the developers. Rob, help me out on that one.
Developers and operators and the owners of villages.
So I've asked Rob to join us today. I met Rob a few months back, and what I found really interesting was that he had so many insights that I hadn't thought of, and I asked him to just share with us today some of the learnings that he's had and some of the, I don't want to say advice because maybe that's a harsh word, but some of the insights that he's learned that you could maybe take into consideration if maybe you're considering going to a retirement village. So Rob, let's just get started, and you're going to excuse me, I'm in the finance world if I get some of the terminology wrong, but as far as I know, there's sectional title, there's freehold, and there's life rights.
Right. Yeah.
So I thought if we could start off with freehold and you could explain it a little bit more and some of the considerations, and we could go on to each one.
Sure. So most people are familiar with freehold property ownership, where you own the building, you own the house in the suburbs, and it's your responsibility from start to finish. So you have full rights to the property and what happens on the property, and it would be the same in a retirement village. You'd be part of an association, but you would own the house and it would be your responsibility to maintain it.
Outright buying it.
Pay your rates and taxes, all the normal things, yes. Outright purchase, and there's a registered title deed in your name at the title deeds.
And then one day when you leave it to your heirs, you're leaving it, they can sell it, and they can sell it to whoever they want.
The gains in the property value would be for you. There may be some exit levy that you have to pay to the estate, but that would differ from estate to estate. But essentially, it's your property, and you would sell it and you could leave it to your heirs as well. Yes.
Okay, so that's the number one. Then we come to the number two, which is the sectional title. Now, how does that differ?
So the way to think about sectional title is you owning a portion of a building, so it could be an apartment, and a portion of the common property. So that's why it's called sectional title, and it's very well described in law in South Africa. So in the same way you would own that section, you would have a title deed, so there would be a registered in the deeds office, and you could also leave that in your estate to someone to inherit. You are responsible for internal maintenance. The body corporate, in other words, the association to which you belong, would take responsibility for outside maintenance, but you pay for that in your levies.
Okay, I'm going to come back to the levies because
Sure.
I think that's quite a big discussion around levies and what you're paying for the cost up front. Okay, so now we've got the two, and now we come to, which I'm hearing more and more about, the life rights. What is that?
Okay, so a life right is called different things in different countries, and it's very well known around the world, very popular in Australia and New Zealand.
Okay.
And it is essentially a lease for the rest of your life. So you're paying up front an amount which pays for your occupation of the building for you and your spouse for the remainder of your lives. And while they differ from village to village, essentially in broad terms you would get back a lump sum when you terminate the contract, whether you're leaving the estate or you both passed away. There would be an amount paid back to your estate when you when you terminate that agreement to stay there.
So would that normally be what you paid for it? So if I
Of
paid 100
most
for
cases.
it, I get my 100 back.
Right, you pay $1 million for the flat.
Okay.
When you terminate the agreement, you would get back $1 million. In some estates, there's a bit of the profits will be paid to you, and in others, you'll get back less. But that will just affect what you paid for it up front.
So yeah, that brings me to that next question I was going to say. So when I'm looking at buying it, either freehold, sectional title, or life rights, is there a different upfront fee? So some of them, is it more cost effective, say, to buy life rights than it is to buy a freehold, obviously?
That's a good question.
Okay.
So in the case of sectional title and freehold, if I'm a developer, I'm building all of these houses and units and I'm selling them, and then I'm out of the picture.
So you get your profit in the
I'm
beginning.
getting my profit right up front. In the case of life rights, I can lower the price in the beginning because I know I'm going to make profit over and over and over as I resell this unit through the years. So yes, there can be a difference in exactly the same house in a freehold village or in a life right village may have a different price when I come in. I could pay less for a life right if that life right developer chooses to offer them at a lower price, and they often do, because he can make up profits over the years from reselling and reselling and reselling.
So that's more like a long-term business.
Yes, he's in it forever.
He's
pretty much in it forever.
And does that also affect the levies? So if I bought it freehold and I bought it life rights and sectional titles, surely, because I know a big thing, when we're doing the planning for our clients, we're saying you're going to move out of your homes and then you're not going to necessarily have rates and taxes, but you're going to be having these levies. And we always give a warning, watch your levies and make sure your levies aren't too much.
Yeah, so levies are very, very difficult to compare between states, first of all, almost impossible. There are things you can compare, but so you should always be comparing a life right village with a life right village, not comparing across, because the life right owner, the company that built the village and owns the village and sells a life right, right of occupation it's called, to a resident, he can decide what he's going to apply his funds to. So he could make the levies lower if he wants to, but he has the legal right to charge you for all of the expenses within the village. So you have to look at it very carefully from that perspective. But yes, the levies can differ quite significantly from a life right village to a freehold village, because, and perhaps one should say that you should just look at your total costs, because in a freehold village, I have to pay the rates and taxes on my house.
Okay.
Whereas in a life right village, the owner of that building must pay rates and taxes to the city for his building. He could choose to levy that from me and so recover those costs. So you have to compare it very carefully and comprehensively across all of your expenses. But essentially, in the case of a life right, the owner is looking after the building. He wants to look after the building because he's going to resell it.
And there's so many people, when I'm doing their planning for their retirement with them, and they come in and now they've been working their whole lives and now they're going to come into retirement, and their wives have, we just tell you, these massive to-do lists of the first things that they're going to do in retirement.
Yep.
But actually what you're telling me is that if you move into the life rights one, you wouldn't actually have your to-do list, because they would be doing actually everything for you. The maintenance,
that's
all
right.
of that would be
I mean,
done
a lot
for
of
you.
the external stuff is dealt with by the company. Internally, you're responsible for your own home, but all of those nasty things like roof repairs and leaks and maintenance and all of that on the outside is dealt with by the owner of the company, and it's less of a burden on you than it is in the case of freehold property.
Okay.
Much less.
And then Rob, something else again that I hear so many times in the discussions we have is whether you move into a retirement village that has medical care. So a lot of times people want to leave the main cities, or they want to go to different areas, but medical's huge. And what do you need to look out for when you're looking at medical care and care facilities within retirement villages?
So I mean, that's a very big issue. People generally ask two things when they come to a village: have you got care, and what are the levies? That's what they want to know. And
those are what their financial planner is warning them to ask.
Exactly, that's what you're warning them about. The thing is that those are two things that are also difficult to compare between villages. And so what I tell people is, on the levy side, make sure you look at the comprehensive costs for you for your monthly bill or budget, as opposed to what you had in the suburbs. And on the care side, probably the most important thing is to make sure that you have care available to you. When you move into the village, you're still independent, and you may be early 70s, say, but you're fully independent, but you're preparing for the future. So you're moving to the state early, you're still fully independent. You need to know that there's care available to you in your home for as long as you need it, until you can no longer be cared for in your home. That's probably the gold standard of villages these days.
And so important.
It's vitally important. Yeah.
Big consideration, and I think it's why a lot of people are, Lynda mentioned
100%.
security and your meals are cooked, but a lot of people are moving in there so that you will be assisted when you can no longer look after yourself.
And these days we can care for people in their homes right through to end of life. Ideally, that's what most people desire. They don't want to move to a care center. So we don't actually talk a lot about medical care. In the retirement industry, we talk about care or assistance with activities of daily living. Most of the work that caregivers do is about those activities. Getting up in the morning, getting dressed, getting bathed, eating, going for a walk. Those sort of things are typically what caregivers or care workers are working with us on. So those can be done in your home, and you don't need to move to a so-called frail care centre. So
because I think the frail care
I'm
pleased to hear that, because so much of what puts people off is the concept of it, but they do want to know that there is that alternative.
It's an alternative.
And then Rob, just our last question is around contracts.
Right.
So, because often the clients bring them to us to read, and they say, well, should I be doing this? What do you think of this contract? I go, please, I don't even know where to start. Any tips on reading contracts and what you should be looking out for in them?
Yeah, so contracts, especially in life right contracts, are usually a very thick document.
Okay.
It's got sometimes it'll have constitutions in there and lots of rules and all of that. Unfortunately, you've got to read through that stuff. You've got to understand what's there. So get help from an advisor if you can. And the things to look at are very much, what am I going to get back? And how am I going to get it back if I'm buying a life right? What are my exit levies? So what do I have to pay to the estate when I leave the estate if I'm buying freehold or sectional title? How are my levies determined, and how are they stabilized over the years ahead? Because I want to make sure that my costs are
otherwise you're not going to know what you're paying in 10 years. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, in some villages they'll have a fixed amount that it's going to go up every year. I'd prefer to see it worked out based on what inflation was and what are the contributing costs.
So, even where we're doing the investing, we're looking at inflation and what we're getting above inflation, so that inflation makes sense on that.
So yes, and people often want to see their levies go up by CPI or headline inflation, but that's not always representative of the costs that the village have. Mostly we see labour costs, and that can be 60-70% of the cost, and labour doesn't go up by CPI, it goes up at a higher rate.
No, we know that.
We've got to be careful what's in the contract. Yeah.
Rob, thank you very much. Thank you
Pleasure.
for sharing your insights. Do you have a website or anything if people wanted to get more information on this? Yeah. Or where would you point people to getting more information?
So I do have a website, www.shireprop.com. Has got a lot of articles about these things we've been talking about today and others, and there are free downloadable lists on things you should check on before you move to retirement villages. There's a checklist there, and that's freely available in English and Afrikaans, I think, on my website.
Rob, thank you very much.
It's a great pleasure.
Thank you very much for joining us on the show. I have asked Rob, because I do believe that we're going to get a lot of requests from you watching the show to have more information, and I will be bringing him back in an event. So please watch out for your invites for an event where we discuss this topic in more detail. Thank you for joining us on the Chartered Show today. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our shows. Might I also ask you to share some questions if you have them, because with this interesting topic, I'm quite sure there's lots more information that you need.